Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to be going over my breakout predictions that I made all the way back in the summer, and I'm going to look back at them and see how many players I accurately predicted a breakout and where my failures were. So let's get right into this video. For context, if you want to find all the videos that I am basically labeling in this one, you can find it all on my YouTube channel with this playlist, Breakout Player Predictions, spanning all the way from 7-8 months ago, and then my long-term videos, which were important. So let's get into the grading and reviewing. Similar to my last video, I'm going to have guidelines for this. So if a player way over exceeded expectations, I'm going to give myself +2. If a player only regularly exceeded them, +1. If a player met his expectations just slightly or his season was ended by injury, I'm going to give it a no grade. If he didn't meet expectations, I'm giving it -1. And if the player had a complete fail of a season or just a really bad season, I'm going to give it a -2. So of course, I'm going to start with my long form video. This one was my offensive breakout players, that I predicted. And my first was Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson had a total failure of a year, 36.5 QBR, 6 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, was benched multiple times. I'm going to give myself a -2 there. But for Tua Tagovailoa, I am going to give myself +2. People really didn't think he was going to do as good as I believed he would. I was a big Tua supporter in the offseason, ended up finishing with 25 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, third in QBR with a 68.8, and then he also finished second in passer rating with 105. Now, my third one was Tony Pollard. Now, it doesn't look like it as right now, only 1,000 yards, 193 attempts, but he finished 12th in rushing yards. He had 9 touchdowns, which was 12th. He had 5.2 yards per carry, which was 7th. And he also had 1,400 yards on the year with 12 touchdowns. He also vastly outperformed Ezekiel Elliott and was a top 10 fantasy running back, which I predicted in that video. Now moving on to Christian Darrisaw, I think this was easily one of the best predictions I made. Many people don't put offensive linemen in their breakout player predictions, but I did. And Christian Darrisaw finished second on PFF's highest graded offensive tackles, allowed 2 sacks, had only 5 penalties and 850 snaps, had such a great year, was a massive Pro Bowl snub, and I thought he actually should have been one of the all-pro tackles as well. But moving on to my last offensive breakout player that I predicted, Albert Okwuegbunam. I said that the Broncos didn't have a big tight end position, or they had a vacancy, and I thought that he could step up and perform in that tight end 1 role, but I ended up not doing it. Greg Dolch took over as the tight end 1, and he finished with 10 catches for 95 yards and only 1 touchdown. So I had 2 massive busts, but I also had 3 really good selections in this video. And so then for my defensive breakout players, I think I also performed pretty well. Firstly, I had Jordan Brooks. Many people thought that Jordan Brooks already had his previous breakout season, but I said that he could put himself into the conversation as a top 10 linebacker, and I think he did solidify that. He was third in solo tackles, which 103, had a second and a forced fumble, no picks though, but he did tear his ACL against the Jets, of course, so I'm going to give myself a +1. Chase Young, I predicted would come back at least a minimum week 6, week 8. And of course, he had a setback in training camp, so didn't have a season basically. So I wish I would have swapped him out with another defensive player, but we live with our choices. Moving on to Nate Hobbs, I'm giving him a +1 because Nate Hobbs did become one of the better slot cornerbacks in the league this year. I think even though he doesn't look like it on the stat sheet, of course, no interceptions, 4 pass deflections. He became very good, especially in the beginning of the year. So I am going to give myself a +1. I think he was easily the best cornerback on that roster. And then my 4th selection was easily my best. Nick Bolton finished second in the AFC with 108 solo tackles, finished with 180 total tackles, which set the franchise record, had 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions, was a captain on the Chiefs defense, as you see the C on his chest, and also had a forced fumble recovery touchdown in the Super Bowl. So I'm very happy about that selection and his breakout. Moving on to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, his season ended early with injury, only had 45 tackles, did have 2 forced fumbles, but I think he was looking good at his time when he was playing. but I'm going to give myself a no grade for that one. And then, of course, my YouTube shorts where I predicted one breakout player from every single team in the NFL. So this is the AFC East. I had Zach Wilson, Gabe Davis, Tua Tagovailoa, and Josh Uche. Zach Wilson, of course, we already went over. Horrible season. Gabe Davis, I think, met expectations. 48 catches, really low, but he did have 836 yards. Low volume guy, of course, third in yards per catch at 17.4. 7 touchdowns, which was good. I'm going to give myself a no grade for that one, though. We already went off for Tua Tagovailoa, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 38.8 QBR, third in the league, second in passer rating with 105. But then another huge, awesome prediction was Josh Uche. I didn't feel like he was getting enough hype in the preseason. I probably should have put him in my main video because he had 11.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles to go right next to Matt Judon, giving myself a +2. For the AFC North, I had Pat Freiermuth, of course. I think he did well, and I think he had top 10 stats for a tight end, which I predicted. Of course, 63 catches, 732 yards, 2 touchdowns, was the favorite target for Kenny Pickett, giving myself a +1. Rashad Bateman did not meet expectations. His season ended early with injury, only finished with 2 touchdowns, 285 yards with 15 catches. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, another guy we went over, season ended early due to injury, but I feel like he was on his way to go above expectations. And then Joseph Osai, of course, tackled Patrick Mahomes early out of bounds to give the Chiefs, a field goal opportunity. So I'm going to give myself -1. He also only had 3.5 sacks. But without that tackle and basically ending the Bengals season, I think I probably would have given him a no grade. Moving on to the AFC South, I had Nico Collins for the Texans. I think he did fine, 481 yards, 2 touchdowns, met expectations to where Nico Collins would be, but I thought he would be more of a 600, maybe 700 guy, so I give myself a -1. Isaiah Rodgers was a wild card pick. I said he would be a special teams breakout player and potentially be a Pro Bowler. Was not, but he actually did have a fine year, met expectations for the Colts slot cornerback with a forced fumble, 3 pass deflections. I think he did fine. Travis Etienne for the Jaguars, very easy pick. 9th in rushing yards, 1,125, 5 touchdowns, 5.1 yards per carry. Had a very good year. And then Caleb Farley for the Tennessee Titans, complete failure of a year, mainly a special teams guy with only 9 tackles in 9 games played. And of course, for the AFC West, 3 of these guys ended up being in my main video. Okwuegbunam, failure of a pick, 95 yards, 1 touchdowns. Nick Bolton, very good selection. Of course, 180 tackles, franchise record, touchdown in the Super Bowl. Very good year, +2. Kenneth Murray, I thought met expectations because people thought Kenneth Murray was, a complete liability for the team. And yes, he didn't have the greatest year for a linebacker, but he did have 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 1 interceptions, 50 solo tackles, and a 60 PFF grade. And then Nate Hobbs, of course, in my main video, I thought he did very well for a slot cornerback on a bad passing defense. Moving on to the NFC East, I had Tony Pollard as my breakout player for the Cowboys. Of course, already went over this. He was in my main video. 5.2 yards per carry, 1,400 total yards and 12 touchdowns. Very good year. I'm going to give myself +2. Xavier McKinney met expectations. He was having a very good start to the year, and he probably was on pace for a +1. But he did break his hand in a motorcycle accident, missing multiple weeks in the season. So I'm going to say he just met expectations. And then Devontae Smith, +2 very easily, 95 catches, 11th in the league, finished with 1,196 yards, 9th in the league with 7 touchdowns, had multiple 100-yard games and 2 touchdown games. Very good season from Devontae Smith. And then Chase Young, obviously, main video, 3 tackles, didn't play much of the season. Moving on to the NFC North, I had a lot of offensive tackles here, 2 out of the 4, because I just liked it. I like the offensive tackles, these young guys, and it worked out for me especially. Penei Sewell, an 80.6 grade, probably solidified himself as a top 10 right tackle in the league. Played very well in 1,142 snaps, but he did have 10 penalties, and he was shaky at certain moments in the season. But I am going to give him a +1. I think he did exceed expectations. Allen Lazard met them. I think some people had him as a 900-yard 8 touchdown guy. Fell a little short, but I'm not going to negate myself. He had a fine season. He met them. And then Christian Darrisaw, main video guy, 90.3 PFF grade, which was 2nd in the league. 853 snaps, phenomenal season. And then Jalen Johnson, I think Jalen Johnson already had a decent amount of hype around him, so I am going to give him a none grade. Did have no interceptions, 7 pass deflections. He had a fine year for the Bears, which I really should have predicted Justin Fields to break out. Moving on to the NFC South, this was just a very shaky class that I had. Rashad Evans, I think he very much met expectations. Of course, no interceptions, but he was more of a run stuffer. 86 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble. Russell Gage, I thought he was going to have a much better year because, I didn't think Chris Godwin was going to come back as soon as possible, and then they signed Julio Jones. So 51 catches, 426 yards with 5 touchdowns. I am going to give myself a -1, even though I think he did meet expectations, just not my expectations for him. Jameis Winston, another quarterback with a failure year such as Zach Wilson, 32.8 QBR, 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Very bad year. But J.C. Horn is the star of the NFC South predictions because he had 3 interceptions, was a lockdown cornerback, very, very good, had a phenomenal year, had one of the lowest yards per catch allowed, so I'm going to definitely give him a +2. And then lastly, for the Rams, I had Van Jefferson. I just didn't think Cooper Kupp was going to have as dominant as a year, and I thought those yards could be allocated to Van Jefferson. But Matthew Stafford had multiple injuries in the season. Van Jefferson's season also was injury-riddled. 26 catches, 369 yards, 3 touchdowns. I'm going to give myself -1. I had Brandon Ayuk for the 49ers. I thought this was a very good prediction. 78 catches, 1,015 yards, outperformed Deebo Samuel with 8 touchdowns as well. Probably a top 10 route runner, very fluid. So I'm going to give myself a +1. Jordan Brooks, I'm going to also give myself a +1, another main video guy, 103 solo tackles, tied for 3rd, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, played well. And then Hollywood Brown, I'm going to say he met expectations just because his season was off to such a great start, but he did get injured with a foot injury or foot or ankle injury late in the season, which inhibited his numbers, but he was on pace for around 1,000 yards, which was his expectation. So how did I perform with my breakout players? Well, for the AFC, I exceeded the expectations of the NFL for these players. For the AFC, I did my best, of course, +2, and the AFC North and South, I had -1. For the NFC, it's a different story. I very much outperformed, or I predicted a lot of players to break out and have successful seasons. Looking at the NFC North, of course, that was very helped by Penei Sewell and Christian Darrisaw. And then the NFC East, I once again had +2, but my only in the red was the NFC West and the NFC. Very good. I think I did very much better than the record prediction video. I think I was better with the breakout players, and of course, +6, so I over-exceeded expectations of these players. And for my offensive and defensive breakout videos, the long form ones, the ones that went over 10 minutes, of course, I performed, I think, well. For the AFC, of course, or for the offensive side, Zach Wilson and Albert Okwuegbunam, of course, were massive failures, but Tua, Tony Pollard, and Christian Darrisaw both over-exceeded their expectations for the season. And then for defensively, I did well, but performed more consistently. Of course, with Nick Bolton, Nate Hobbs, and Jordan Brooks going over expectations, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Chase Young having those injury seasons. In total, I had a, +4 grade, offensive and defensive, both with +2. And then looking at my best predictions, on the offensive side, I had Tony Pollard, of course, long form video, Pro Bowler, and had almost 1,400 yards with 12 touchdowns. And then Christian Darrisaw, who was the number 2 graded tackle per PFF. On the defensive side, I had Nick Bolton, who had 180 total tackles, which is a franchise record, and also had a touchdown fumble recovery in the Super Bowl. Josh Uche had 11.5 sacks. Of course, that was the AFC East breakout video. And then J.C. Horn, who became a lockdown top 10 cornerback, who some debate is even in the top 5. And that was, of course, in the NFC South breakout video. So, of course, let me know how you guys think I did in the comments. I think I performed pretty well in my predictions. I had a lot of good ones, but I did have some stinkers. Of course, that's going to happen. But make sure you check out my other video that I just posted about my record prediction overview. And let me know some players that you think will absolutely break out in 2023. Of course, I'm going to also give my predictions as well. But thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Go on my playlist. Watch all those videos before coming to this one. And I will see you guys in the next one.